Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Never gets old. Never ever gets old. And that song is 35 years. What, 79? I think that was 79. So 79, 21. Yeah, 21 and 24. Man, that's 45 years. God. Oh. You ever want to know about what's a classic? That's it. Right there. Tyson, come on through, man. Uh,
Alaikum.
your time to shine.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Let me
That original
get
Nick
this thing on.
black light on it, bro. That's it.
Alhamdulillah. It's all good. Inshallah, we'll get into it today.
So what, you ain't dressed for the camera? You still
Oh,
black?
no. I just had I'm ready.
Okay. Yeah,
You
just
ready?
in case you lay
Alhamdulillah.
it down in your pajamas and you just gonna do it.
Nah. We're good. We're good. I was just getting my stuff ready on the screen so we can go ahead and jump into it.
You co-hosted straight, right?
Yep.
All right.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
It's all
Okay.
yours. Stepping back.
I'll begin. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Brothers and sisters, inshallah, everybody's doing well this morning. And we're in for another really great session from Imam Fahim. I'm looking forward tremendously to the learning. So for where we are now, we're close to the end of this thing. We've done a lot, alhamdulillah, over the past couple of months. And where we are right now is what is the last part of the book, Carry On Tradition. I'm thinking about making one update to the book. I want to add one more piece to it, but for us, this is the last piece. We've gone through everything. So we started, I'll do a quick little return to and using language from our brother Amilcar Cabral. There's a lot associated with him that talks about like returning to the source. So we started here. 1441 is when the book begins, because in that year, this is the first interaction that led to forced enslavement of one of the first documented interactions that led to the forced enslavement of our ancestors in West Africa. Portuguese sailors came down on ships. They pulled up in the year 1441 to West Africa, right around Mauritania, and they pulled up to a fishing village, jumped off the boat, brutally kidnapped 12 West Africans, put them back on the boat, took them back to Portugal to be forcibly enslaved. After that, they continued in that action, in that activity. The Spanish joining, French joining, English joining, the Dutch, all these other Western European countries who are still trying to control the world through their colonial imperial designs, all began to, make those moves, following the footsteps of Portuguese. So that's where the book begins. But as man plans, Allah plans, and as things are happening to our people on the African continent, our people plan and we respond too. So we never just accepted or took it. And that is a very, very important piece, which is also, in line with our tradition, our Islamic tradition. Allah doesn't change the condition of a people until they change what's within themselves. And our people are like, oh, if this is what's happening, then we will establish something new for ourselves in order to deal with, fight back against, and survive this new reality that is, falling upon us. And that's a tradition of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion. And it hasn't stopped up until this day. So with that 1441 moment, and right after it, immediately after it, our folks responded. They said, oh, these people are coming back, and they think that they have the ability to take from our people again? No, there will be consequences. And the consequences are, you got to fight us. You're going to have to take us. You're going to have to, if you want to take our people, it's going to be over our dead bodies. And to the Portuguese captains that were responsible for those first voyages in 1441 and their subsequent voyages after that, none of them made it past the third voyage, because for both of the two captains that were responsible for those first voyages, their crews were destroyed, their ships were destroyed, and they were killed on their third voyage to West Africa to do the same thing. So it happened the first time. Fool me once, fool me twice. They came back the second time. Third time, that was it. It was a wrap. And as a result of that, Prince Henry, who was a very influential political leader in Portugal, made a decree: we are not going back to West Africa for an extended period of time because it's too costly. They were losing ships and they were losing people. So the response was so strong that it caused those people to be like, oh, no, we can't do this anymore. But then their greed took them over and they decided to get back out there. While they were doing that, we have the story that we're going to begin talking about, which is Amilcar Cabral. So that's our brothers and sisters in Guinea-Bissau. The Portuguese begin colonizing land in West Africa. So we'll get there. But we started here in the book Carry On Tradition. And then we just talked about all the different ways that the tradition proceeded from that moment of 1441, wherever our people were at. Land, sea, of course, here in the Western Hemisphere, the tradition of Santo Domingo, where our brothers and sisters were at. Haiti, the first major rebellion of a large group of brothers and sisters here in the Western Hemisphere, and how that continued to inspire. So you got individuals who would resist and would rebel, but the first major one was the Santo Domingo Rebellion of 1521. Then we talked about this brother, Gaspar Yanga, who was in Mexico, Central America, and how he's one of the first people in the colonial era to be able to fight back against the colonizers, defeat them, and win land back and make it a liberated, free land. And he did that for himself. He did that with the help of his brothers and sisters who he was fighting with. And that land that Gaspar Yanga won for his people still belongs to Black folks in Mexico to this day, in the Veracruz area of Mexico. And so he's known as the first liberator. All right, so that's the tradition. It just continues. And then from there, we talked about brothers and sisters on the African continent. So we went back, Queen Nzinga. And who was Queen Nzinga fighting? She was fighting the Portuguese. So to keep her people free, had to fight against the Portuguese. Because they stayed active all throughout that time from the 1400s to the present. So we left Queen Nzinga. We came back to the Western Hemisphere. We talked about the sister Queen Nanny in Jamaica, our brothers and sisters there, and Maroon communities fighting proud for the freedom and liberation of our people. We went on. We talked about the tradition of the Haitian Revolution, which goes back to Santo Domingo, which goes back to Columbus shortly after 1492, like all of that. We highlighted Toussaint. We highlighted our brother Jean-Jacques Dessalines, because this is the tradition. Every generation, it just flows through the blood of our people, wherever our people are at. And then we talked about some stuff that's happened here, major in the United States, German Coast Revolt of 1811. And this is the largest rebellion of our brothers and sisters here in the United States in the history of this country, 1811, which took place in Louisiana, and inspired by the events of the Haitian Revolution, which culminated in 1804, going into 1805. So 1791 to 1804, Haitian Revolution. A few years after that, and the history says there were some brothers and sisters who fought in Haiti, who were then in Louisiana at this time, and they helped lead the German Coast Revolt. Our brother Nat Turner, talked about him, proud exemplar of this tradition. We talked about Sister Carlotta La Negra, who was in Cuba, who led a revolt with brothers and sisters there to free her people. We talked about our sister Harriet Tubman, described as a Moses of her people, fighting to bring her people to freedom. We talked about the sister Ya Asanteway in the late 1800s back on the African continent, fighting to keep her people free from English colonization. We talked about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey from the island of Jamaica, who then comes to the United States, forming his organization, the UNIA, inspired by Booker T. Washington, inspired by Black movements throughout the African diaspora, but then brings the UNIA to the United States and creates the largest organization in the history of the United States of people of color, especially of Black folks. And Garvey's influence is felt far and wide and still felt to this day. We talked about the origins of our community, the Nation of Islam, and how they carried on the tradition, inspired by Booker T, inspired by the UNIA, and then also the genius that was just in our community. And this is a tradition that has not stopped. It is still alive and flourishing to this day. And we have so many powerful exemplars from this tradition. Our brother, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, is a great one. And so we profile him in the text, talk about his legacy. And then, of course, we talk about the legacy of the Nation of Islam. We talk about some of the prominent luminaries from this tradition, Sister Claire Muhammad, our brother Malcolm, brother Muhammad Ali, the Imam Wadaduddin Muhammad. In this book, I also mention how even when folks begin to remove themselves from the tradition and they emphasize just bits and pieces of the tradition, the type of influence that they have. So Brother Clarence 13X, who is known as the founder of the 5% Nation, and the 5% Nation had a very, very major impact on Black youth, 70s, 80s, especially hip hop culture. If somebody was to say, what is the spiritual philosophy of hip hop? You're not going to say Christianity, although there are a number of like prominent rappers who that's their faith or they align with that as a faith system. But if you were to say, what is the spiritual tradition that drives hip hop music, like real Black, authentic hip hop music, it's Islam. And Islam that was developed through the nation. And then, of course, the influence of Clarence 13X and his way of taking some of those ideas from the Nation of Islam and then imparting them to the community, especially the Black youth in the 70s and the 80s. And that's also part of the reason why authentic hip hop has more of the tradition of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion in there, because there's principles in that. But, you know, we get further and further away from the source, and people bring money in, and you want to get closer to the imperialists and the colonizers. It's very easy to lose yourself. And then another very important figure from the history of the nation, Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, known as Louis X. And there's so many other names that could be on that list. But in my book, trying to keep my book short, I'm, bringing a few of the names to the forefront. And then because of this history and these traditions, it continues to inspire the next generation. So then we ended up over the past couple of weeks talking about the Black Panther Party. And for me as a child, the history that my parents and folks in my community brought to me the most, like my father, he was affiliated with the Black Panther Party in Sacramento. And my mother was a community worker for the Black Panther Party up in Sacramento. So Free Breakfast for Children program, 1968, 1969. My mother would volunteer for that, but my father could be considered more of a rank and file member of the party. So as I was coming up, I have an older sister. We had all this Black memorabilia from 60s and 70s. My father had this collection of Black Panther Party papers. And as a child, I'll just sit and I'd read that stuff. I'm looking at artwork from Emory Douglas, from Sister Asali Dixon, and of course, articles being written by brothers and sisters in the party. And we know the Black Panther, the newspaper that the party had, was inspired by Muhammad Speaks, which was inspired by the um, the newspaper from the UNIA, and how that is a tradition in and of itself. So I'm looking at this and not knowing at that time, because I'm young, this is a generational tradition of our community saying we need to be able to teach our people and communicate to our people directly and not have any intermediaries with that. Cool. So I'm being raised up on that. They had all these posters and pictures from the 60s and 70s, especially like political messages. And it sat with me so much, like very, very heavy, just to see the power of our people. I wasn't getting this in school. I'd get it in my home. And then my parents made the decision to create what we would eventually, like the young people who participated in this thing, what we would eventually call Black school. So now I have my Black program, and my Black program is heavily influenced by my experience as a kid attending Black school. So we would go to Black school. We would hold classes at, whether it was at somebody's house, or my father was a teacher. He had other colleagues that were teachers. So sometimes we would hold a class at school, or we would be at the city college, or we'd be at a college or a university in a classroom, and we would have our Black study sessions, history books, textbooks. We have artifacts from 60s and 70s. So sometimes we might be looking at a Black Panther Party paper, or watching a documentary or something like this. But it was one of my windows into our people, and especially this tradition. And then the other part was the history of the nation, and then the person of Malcolm X. So these are two of the foundational building blocks for me. I could identify Huey P. Newton in photo probably before I could recognize popular images of, white presidents of the United States, and, other prominent figures from the Black Panther Party, and same thing, other prominent figures from other parts of our history, especially Black Muslim history. And I'm just thankful for that. And so following this tradition, as we see in the book, all these things that preceded it, the Black Panther Party was a benefactor of all of that history. Huey P. Newton was a great student of his people and of his history, and used that to formulate the vehicle that he created with Bobby Seale, the Black Panther Party. And in the Black Panther Party, you see so much. Like when you're looking at what they did, you can say, okay, this looks like Santo Domingo Rebellion. This looks like the Haitian Revolution. This looks like the UNIA. This looks like the nation here. And then, of course, every generation has its own thing that it brings to it. So then you get that unique reality from them. But proud, amazing exemplar of this tradition. So that's the last piece that we cover in the book that represents the tradition here in the United States. But when we talk about our tradition diasporically, we continue. And then, not to like give the book a happy ending, because our story is what our story is, and there's beauty and power in it all the time. And in that, seeing the beauty and the power, you can feel happy about that. But as a way to start the story and end the story with a very definitive point, I chose the Black Panther Party and Amilcar Cabral intentionally, because Huey talked about the spirit of the Black Panther Party was born in that first instance when brothers and sisters from our history were stolen from their homeland. Like in that moment of, oh, you trying to take me from my family, you trying to take me from my home, that spirit of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion was born. So that's part of the reason why the Black Panther Party helps finish out the book. Because when we start in 1441, historically, that's one of those first moments that we know of where you could say that spirit that Huey was talking about came from. And then the other way to finish out the book is in 1441, the Portuguese started doing all of this. Shortly after that, the Portuguese began colonizing parts of the African continent. From the 1400s all the way up into the 20th century, into the 1900s, our brothers and sisters who were dealing with the Portuguese never stopped fighting until they kicked them out. So who was a major figure in that battle to banish the Portuguese from West Africa? Our brother, Amilcar Cabral. So the story is powerful, and it's a beautiful way for us to revisit our history and then to see the commitment and the dedication of our people. So Cabral, it's so easy to find images of Cabral. But in the book, of course, I'm using AI technology to create recreations of our history and of these particular figures. But I want to read some of what's in here so we can get the history, and then I'll finish up with another session next week and give more of the timeline of Portuguese colonization, resistance to Portuguese colonization, what the tradition of righteous rebellion looked like in West Africa, and then more of a timeline of the fight that Cabral and his comrades waged from 63, 64 to 73, 74, leading to the independence of Guinea-Bissau and the removal of this diabolic, devilish, imperial colonial power that tried to hold on to Black bodies, the resources in Africa for half a millennia. For real, let's think about that. I remember hearing Imam Fahim say something. It might have been in our Rise session last time, or it might have been in the khutbah for Jummah, maybe last week. But he was talking about time. No, that's what it was. It was in the session that you did last Sunday, and you were talking about time, and you mentioned something about like 50 years and how with Allah's time, that's just a drop in the bucket. 500 years, 1441 to 1964. Like, it's more than 520 years. So that's more than half a millennia that the Portuguese were involved in brutalizing, terrorizing, trying to forcibly enslave, trying to control Black people on the African continent. And of course, you know that they wanted to break the spirit of those brothers and sisters so they could continue maintaining control. But they never could. 5+ centuries, and you couldn't stop the fight in the people, because that's what we come from. And that's why it's so important for us to see it. Like, and with our brothers and sisters in Philistine and Palestine right now, they've been fighting for almost 8 decades. A people who were properly introduced to the tradition of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion, a people who have Allah in their hearts and in their minds. You are never going to stop them. They will eventually win. And this is what our history shows us. The people will not stop fighting because their fight is justified. It's right. It's moral. It's righteous. And our people fought for more than half a millennia, and they defeated them. And we can pick a whole bunch of other stories from the African continent and other stories as well from different parts of the African diaspora. But this one is so fitting because we started in 1441 with the Portuguese, and now we're ending in the 20th century, 1964 to 1974, with the defeat of the Portuguese and an independent Guinea-Bissau. So in the text, introducing Amilcar Cabral and their struggle. So I say Amilcar Cabral was a seminal figure in the struggle for independence in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, renowned for his intellectual prowess and strategic acumen in the fight against Portuguese colonial rule. Cabral was born September 12, 1924, and Bafata, Portuguese Guiana. To Cape Verdean and Guianan parents, Cabral's early years were marked by stark reminders of colonization that deeply influenced his later political and ideological development. So at the time he was born, so the Portuguese began to colonize the area where Cabral's family's from around 1446, 1450. So from that time on, they maintained control over it. And then in the 1800s, around, I think it was like 1870, 1879 or something like that, the Portuguese colonial empire separates Guinea-Bissau as its own colony, but Portuguese are still in control of it. They just give it like a different administrative title. So he's born in that. But by the time he's born, we're getting close to 500 years of control and colonization and imperialism by the Portuguese in that area. But the people never stopped fighting. And the people never stopped wanting to be free and wanting the Portuguese to be out of there. And so, continuing with what we have here, educated initially in Cape Verde, Cabral pursued higher studies in Lisbon, Portugal, because of the colonial reality. So he's able to go to Portugal, the quote unquote motherland of that colonial reality. He studies there. While he's there, he's around other African folks from the African diaspora. Of course, he's being exposed to Black history and Black revolutionary history in the Western Hemisphere, and then takes all that information and brings that back to his people. His time in Lisbon was transformative there. He engaged with other African students in anti-colonial activism and helped establish the Centro de Estudos Africanos. So Portuguese is very similar to Spanish. So the Center for African Studies. This period honed his political theories and laid the groundwork for his future leadership in the independence movement. So this is what's always interesting, especially about these folks, these devilish folk, and I use that intentionally, who have these imperial colonial designs. Like they build what they build, man plans, Allah plans. So because of what they created, they actually facilitated their own defeat because their colonial apparatus allows the men and women that they're trying to control and colonize to move through their colonies or to move through what they control. So he's in Lisbon, but he's in Lisbon with other brothers and sisters who are feeling the same thing. We want these people out of our lands. What are we going to do? And then connecting them to a larger African diaspora, because so many of us have been influenced by imperialism and colonization from Western Europeans. And we want the same thing. We want these people out of our homes, or we want these people out of our lands. We want these people out of our communities. So then the newest and the freshest ideals are interchanged between our brothers and sisters. And then when our brothers and sisters return home, they are empowered by that fight, that renewed commitment, and that new information that they use and they implement in their struggles for independence and freedom. Upon returning to Guinea-Bissau, he conducted an extensive agricultural survey that brought him into close contact with the rural populace, whose plight deeply influenced his commitment to independence and social reform. In 1956, amidst growing tensions with colonial authorities, Cabral, along with his half-brother Luis Cabral and others, founded the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIGC, signaling the start of a concerted independence movement. So it's one thing to start it and bring people together. It's another thing to say, you know what we're going to do? It's time for us to fight. So we'll get into that. And this is where I'll start to wrap up. And then we'll dedicate the next session to more of that timeline of filling in that history, because some of us, we might be very well aware of what happened, the history that led up to the PAIGC being formed. But some of us might not be. It's good for us to review it because it's such a powerful story of these people came in with these designs thinking that they're going to control our homeland. And they did for a long period of time, but they couldn't extinguish the fire of the fight in the people. And the people just waited, patiently, planned. And they knew that one generation was going to be able to do it. And every generation contributed what they could to keep passing that spirit down. And then this generation of Cabral they were able to defeat their oppressors. So Cabral's leadership was pivotal as the PAIGC navigated the challenges of organizing a liberation struggle. And what made it that much more successful, as we were reading in the previous paragraph, like he was intentional. His people were intentional about connecting with the people. We need to be out there. We need to know what the people want. We need to know what the people need. You see a similar approach with the Black Panther Party. Huey talked about, we got to organize the brothers and the sisters on the block and being in the community. What do the people want? What do the people need? And the Black Panther Party did a similar thing. Like they conducted surveys in West Oakland and other parts of Oakland to figure out what were the greatest needs, what were the greatest challenges that Black folks were facing, so they can be informed. And then also, when the people know you and you make a move, the people are willing to move with you. So Cabral's leadership was pivotal as the PAIGC navigated the challenges of organizing a liberation struggle, which evolved from nonviolent resistance to armed conflict after the massacre in 1951, Pijujuti massacre in 1951. The massacre, where dock workers striking for better conditions were killed by Portuguese forces, underscored the brutal realities of colonial rule and galvanized Cabral and the PAIGC towards a strategy of armed resistance. So this is the concept of by any means necessary. They started saying, of course, we're not trying to put our lives on the line up front, but we want to be free. But when it became very clear that who they're dealing with doesn't have the same moral, ethical understanding, we got to move differently. And so they started out using various nonviolent resistance tactics. But then when you shed the blood of the people in that way, we have to explore other possibilities for our resistance. And so they moved from nonviolent resistance to armed resistance. And they did that also in a very strategic way. You just can't, you don't become a fighter overnight. You have to train. And they did that. They trained. They trained their minds. They trained their bodies. They used information as a weapon. They organize their people and they remain connected to their people and they remain dedicated and committed. And once they made that decision, armed struggle it is, they stayed committed to that until they defeated their enemy and they liberated their land. So this is an introduction and a recap. Like I wanted you to be able to see, we started in 1441 for a reason, because that's one of the earliest documented instances of Western Europeans coming to the African continent and stealing our people. But in that moment, two different things were born. I'm sure there's some other things that were born, but for the purpose of the text, two different things were born. So that launches this imperial colonial epoch, which we're still dealing with to this day, but it also launched the spirit of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion. That fight that is motivated by that spirit of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion. Both of those. And what we explore after that in the text is all the different ways that that tradition of righteous resistance and righteous rebellion has shown up throughout the diaspora. And now here in the last section of the book, we introduced in 1441 the Portuguese and our brothers and sisters on the African continent. In the 20th century, this final fight between them in this one particular area of West Africa, where our brothers and sisters were able to fight and reclaim their freedom and independence and banish the Portuguese from their lands. So we'll be more detailed next time, break down that timeline and see that history. But this is where we are. And this brother right here, Amilcar Cabral, played such an important role in that final step of bringing his people back to having a free land. And it's our history. It's our tradition. It is what our people are going to continue to do because it's who we are. It's in us. And we will not stop until our people, wherever our people are free. And then we can build the communities, we can build the social structures, governmental systems that are necessary for there to be peace in this world. You know, our people can bring that back. So the story of Cabral is a very important one. And I'm glad that we were able to give it some attention. And next week, inshallah, we'll go deeper into it, get the timelines and the dates of all of that so we can really see what was happening, see what the fighting was like, and then see what that freedom looked like when our people won that back in 73 and 74. All right. Imam Fahim, that's what I have for the morning.